You're driving home after work. Red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror. Your heart sinks. You pull over, and the officer walks up to your window. What you say in the next 60 seconds will determine whether you drive away in 5 minutes or sit on that roadside for an hour. Every single day, thousands of drivers turn a simple traffic stop into a nightmare because they don't know one critical fact. Most traffic stops can end immediately if you know exactly what to say. I've spent over a decade analyzing traffic stop case law and reviewing hundreds of body cam videos. I've studied the Supreme Court rulings, the police training manuals, and the actual language officers use to extend stops beyond their legal limit. And I've identified 5 specific tricks that force officers to either wrap it up or reveal they're violating your rights. This is educational content only. For specific legal guidance, consult a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. I'm going to show you the 5 exact tricks that end traffic stops fast, the precise words to use, and why they work every single time. Trick number 1, the status question. Here's what most people do wrong. The officer asks where you're going, where you've been, what you've been up to. You answer because it seems polite. Bad move. Every word you speak gives the officer more time and more material to work with. The first trick that ends stops immediately is forcing the officer to define your legal status. Picture this. Officer walks up, asks for your license and registration. You hand them over through a slightly cracked window. He goes back to his car, runs your information, walks back and says, "So where are you headed tonight?" This is the moment. Most people say, "Oh, just heading home from dinner." Congratulations. You just gave him permission to keep talking. Here's the legal reality. There are 3 types of police encounters: voluntary, detention, and arrest. In a voluntary encounter, you can leave any time. In a detention, they need reasonable suspicion. In an arrest, they need probable cause. The problem? It's often unclear which one you're in, and officers deliberately blur these lines. The exact words you say are, "Officer, am I free to leave, or am I being detained?" Say it calmly, respectfully, but clearly. This question does something powerful. It forces the officer to declare the legal status of your interaction. If he says you're free to leave, you politely say, "Thank you, officer." Roll up your window and drive away. The stop is over. If he says you're being detained, now you know the rules have changed. At this point, you say, "I understand." I invoke my right to remain silent. Here's why this works. Officers are trained to keep people talking because people incriminate themselves. The moment you ask about your status, you signal that you understand your rights. Body cams record everything, and this exchange creates a clear record. If the officer says you're free to leave but then tries to keep questioning you, that becomes evidence of an illegal detention. Courts have repeatedly ruled in Rodriguez versus United States that officers cannot prolong a traffic stop beyond the time necessary to handle the matter for which the stop was made. By asking this question, you're putting a clock on the encounter. Let me show you how this plays out. Wrong versus right. Wrong way. Officer says, "Where are you coming from?" You say, "Just left a friend's house." He says, "Oh yeah? What were you doing there?" You say, "Just hanging out, watching the game." He says, "Anything to drink?" Now you're trapped in an interrogation. Right way. Officer says, "Where are you coming from?" You say, "Officer, am I free to leave, or am I being detained?" He says, "Well, I'm just asking." You repeat, "I understand, officer. Am I free to leave?" Now he has to choose. And most of the time, if he doesn't have reasonable suspicion, he'll say yes. Bottom line, the status question ends fishing expeditions immediately. Trick number 2, the detention timer. Even if the officer says you're being detained, the stop still has to end quickly. Here's the second trick, invoking the time limit. After studying over 200 traffic stop cases, I can tell you that the biggest mistake people make is assuming officers can hold them as long as they want. They can't. The Supreme Court was crystal clear in Rodriguez. A traffic stop can last only as long as necessary to complete the mission of the stop. If he pulled you over for speeding, he can only hold you long enough to write the ticket. That's it. Once the reason for the stop is complete, you are free to go. Even if the officer wants to keep asking questions. Here's the exact phrase. Officer, has the purpose of this traffic stop been completed? This question is a legal hammer. Let me paint you a scenario. Officer pulls you over for a broken taillight. He takes your license, writes you a warning, walks back to your car, and hands it to you. Then he starts asking, "Mind if I ask you a few questions? You in a hurry?" Most people think they have to stay and answer. Wrong. The moment he handed you that warning, the legal justification for the stop ended. You now say, "Officer, has the purpose of this traffic stop been completed? Am I free to leave?" If he says the stop is complete, you leave. If he says no, you follow up with, "For the record, what additional violation am I being investigated for?" This is critical. He can't just say, "I want to talk." He needs articulable, reasonable suspicion of another crime. If he can't provide it, the detention is illegal. Body cams love this moment because it exposes whether the officer has legal grounds or is just fishing. Here's the progressive escalation if you don't use this trick. Officer hands you the ticket. You sit there. He says, "You seem nervous." You say, "No, I'm fine." He says, "Mind if I search your car?" You say, "I guess not." Now he's tearing through your vehicle for 45 minutes, and it all started because you didn't ask if the stop was over. Compare that to this. Officer hands you the ticket. You say, "Has the purpose of this stop been completed?" He says, "Yeah, but..." You say, "Thank you, officer. Am I free to leave?" He says, "Yes." You leave. Stop over in 90 seconds. This trick works because most officers won't risk an illegal detention charge when you clearly know the law. And if they do try to hold you illegally, your recording captures it, and any evidence they find gets thrown out in court. Bottom line, the detention timer stops the moment the ticket is written. Trick number 3, the consent killer. The third trick is the most powerful because it shuts down the number one tactic officers use to extend stops: getting your permission. After reviewing hundreds of body cam videos, I can tell you that officers are trained to phrase searches as friendly requests. They say things like, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, do you?" Or, "Nothing illegal in the car, right? So you're okay if I just check?" These are traps. If you say yes, you've waived your Fourth Amendment rights. If you hesitate or say, "I guess," they interpret that as consent. And once you consent, anything they find is admissible, even if they had no probable cause to search in the first place. The exact words are, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." Say it clearly, firmly, and repeatedly if necessary. Here's why this phrase is so powerful. The Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches. Without your consent, a warrant, or probable cause, the officer cannot legally search your vehicle. Most traffic stops don't involve probable cause. The officer is hoping you'll just give permission because you think refusing makes you look guilty. It doesn't. Let me show you the dialogue. Officer says, "You don't have anything illegal in the car, do you?" Most people say, "No, nothing." Officer says, "Great. So you won't mind if I take a look." You say, I guess that's fine." Game over. You just consented. Now compare it to this. Officer says, "You don't have anything illegal in the car, do you?" You say, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." He says, "Why not? You got something to hide?" You repeat, "I do not consent to any searches." Now the burden is back on him. If he searches anyway, he needs to articulate probable cause on his body cam. And if he can't, anything he finds gets suppressed in court. This happened in a case I analyzed from Maryland. Driver refused consent 3 times. Officer searched anyway, found drugs. Case dismissed because the search was illegal. The refusal was on body cam, and the judge ruled the officer had no probable cause. Here's the progressive mistake people make. Officer asks to search. You say yes because you think you have nothing to hide. He finds an old pill bottle from a prescription that expired. Or he finds a pocket knife your friend left in the car. Or he claims he smells marijuana even though there isn't any. Now you're under arrest for something you didn't even know about, all because you gave consent. The consent killer stops this immediately. Bottom line, never consent to searches, no matter how innocent you think you are. Trick number 4, the scope limiter. Even if the officer orders you out of the car, there's a trick that limits what happens next. This is the scope limiter, and it's based on a critical Supreme Court case called Pennsylvania versus Mims. That case said officers can order you out of the vehicle for safety reasons. But here's what most people don't know. The order has to be based on specific, articulable facts related to safety. It can't just be because the officer feels like it. The exact phrase is, for the record, what is the lawful reason for ordering me out of the vehicle? This question does 2 things. First, it forces the officer to state a reason on camera. Second, it creates a record that you're complying under protest, not voluntarily. Here's how it plays out. Officer says, step out of the vehicle. Most people just get out because they think they have to. But before you move, you say, Officer, are you asking me or ordering me to step out? If he says he's asking, you can decline. If he says he's ordering, you follow up with, for the record, what is the lawful reason for ordering me out of the vehicle? Now he has to justify it. If he says, for my safety, you respond, I understand. I am complying under protest, and my hands will stay visible. Why does this matter? Because once you're out of the car, officers have more control. They can pat you down, position you away from the vehicle, and even claim they see something in plain view. But if the order to exit was unlawful, anything that happens afterward can be challenged. Let me show you a before and after. Before. Officer says, get out. You get out. He pats you down, finds something in your pocket. You're arrested. In court, his justification is simply, I ordered him out for safety. That usually holds up because you didn't question it. After, officer says, get out. You say, are you ordering me? He says, yes. You say, what is the lawful reason? He says, I thought I saw movement. You say, I am complying under protest. Now, if he finds something, your attorney can argue the order was pretextual and the search was illegal. The scope limiter works because it creates a clear record of whether the officer had legitimate grounds. Courts in multiple states have ruled that vague safety concerns aren't enough to justify searches. The officer needs specific facts. Bottom line, question the order, comply under protest, and document everything. Trick number 5, the silent treatment. The 5th trick is the simplest, but also the most misunderstood. Invoking your right to remain silent correctly. Here's the mistake I see constantly. People think just staying quiet is enough. It's not. In a case called Salinas versus Texas, the Supreme Court ruled that your silence can actually be used against you unless you explicitly invoke your Fifth Amendment right. That means you have to say it out loud. The exact words are, I invoke my right to remain silent, and I want to speak to an attorney. Say both parts. The first part stops the questioning. The second part triggers your Sixth Amendment right to counsel, which legally ends interrogation. Here's why this works. Officers are trained to interpret silence as suspicious or as an admission of guilt. But the moment you invoke your rights explicitly, they're required to stop questioning you. Anything they ask after that point can't be used in court. Let me show you how this goes wrong. Officer says, how much have you had to drink tonight? You just sit there quietly. Officer notes in his report, subject refused to answer, and appeared nervous. In court, the prosecutor argues your silence shows consciousness of guilt. Now compare it to this. Officer says, "How much have you had to drink tonight?" You say, "I invoke my right to remain silent and I want to speak to an attorney." Officer has to stop. If he keeps asking questions, those answers get thrown out. Here's the progressive escalation. Officer asks where you're going. You answer. He asks where you've been. You answer. He asks if you've been drinking. You hesitate. He uses your hesitation as reasonable suspicion for a field sobriety test. You fail because you're nervous, not drunk. You get arrested, all because you didn't invoke early. The right way? Officer asks the first question. You say, "I invoke my right to remain silent." He might say, "Come on, I'm just trying to help." You repeat, "I want to speak to an attorney." Stop is over. Bottom line. Invoke clearly, invoke early, and never explain why. The first 30 seconds. Before any of these tricks work, you have to survive the first 30 seconds safely. Here's the protocol. When you see lights, pull over immediately using your turn signal. Turn off your engine. If it's dark, turn on your dome light. Put both hands on the steering wheel where the officer can see them. Lock your doors. Roll your window down only 2 to 4 inches, just enough to hand documents through, then announce clearly, "I am locking the vehicle for safety, and I will hand you my documents through the window." Why does this matter? Because it controls access and prevents plain view claims. If the officer can't see into your car easily, he can't claim he saw something suspicious. This procedure shows cooperation without vulnerability, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. State-specific variations. These tricks work nationwide, but some details vary by state. For example, in states like Texas and Florida, the smell of marijuana can still justify a search because it's illegal. But in Colorado and Maryland, courts have ruled that smell alone isn't enough since marijuana is legal. Another variation: some states require you to identify yourself by law, even if you're just a passenger. In Indiana, you must provide your name, address, and date of birth if operating a vehicle. In California, only drivers are required to show ID. Know your state's specific rules, but the core tricks, asking about your status, invoking the detention timer, refusing consent, limiting scope, and staying silent, work everywhere. Here's the core principle. Traffic stops are not conversations. They're legal interactions, and you control how long they last by knowing exactly what to say. The 5 tricks end stops immediately. Ask if you're free to leave. Invoke the detention timer once the ticket is written. Refuse all searches. Question any orders and comply under protest. And invoke your right to silence with an attorney. These aren't just phrases, they're your rights. And using them doesn't make you difficult. It makes you protected. Memorize these 4 phrases and use them every single time. Am I free to leave? I invoke my right to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney. I do not consent to any searches. Print them out. Practice them. Carry them in your wallet if you need to. The next time you see those red and blue lights, you'll know exactly how to end the stop fast and safe. Remember, this is educational content only, not legal advice. Always consult with a qualified attorney in your state for your specific situation. If this helped you, hit that like button, subscribe for more legal breakdowns, and tap the bell so you never miss a video that could protect your rights. Share this with anyone who drives, because everyone needs to know how to end a traffic stop legally and immediately. Knowledge is the difference between 5 minutes on the roadside and an hour in handcuffs. Now you have the knowledge. Use it.